Thank you so much for that introduction. I am wondering if I should keep the music on as I speak. Maybe we can have it on in the background. It'll be fun. Hello, everyone. Good morning from Montreal, Canada. Good evening to you. Thank you for tuning in late. I know we have people doing homework. We have people in the car. We have people all over the place. It is wonderful to be here and connected to you. Despite the tech issues, it doesn't really matter. We get to miraculously connect remotely despite it all, which I think is always wonderful. Anyways, I've what I hope is a pretty interesting presentation for you today. The goal is to share with you the work that I do, how I got there, the lessons I learned along the way, as well as just a quick little conclusion in terms of why I think art is something that is really powerful, that can make a difference, and hopefully you will enjoy it too. Definitely feel free to message me on the chat. I don't know if I can see it while I'm presenting, but if you have any questions, just drop them in the chat so that anyone can, so that at the end we can maybe like collect all of those, because we're going to be doing a Q&A later. With that being said, I'm going to share my screen and get started over here. All right. Can we see my screen? I'm guessing yes.
Yes,
Okay.
we can.
Beautiful. It's my signal to get started. So my name is Benjamin Von Wong, and Von Wong is actually an invented name. Benjamin Wong is my real name. And 6 hours away from me when I first started photography, someone was Benjamin Wong. And I was like, nope, I need to invent a new name. So anyways, Von means from in German, Benjamin Von Wong. And the work that I do looks something like this. And the reason I create photos that look kind of, I guess, a little bit weird, a little bit fantastical, is because I want people to look at this and go, what am I looking at? Is this real? Is this fake? How is it done? And that how is really important because it creates a sense of curiosity in people. Curiosity is important because now if someone wants to know what they're looking at, and whether or not it's real and how it was done, then I can have a conversation with them. I can tell them, oh, actually, this is a photograph. It's a photograph, and what you're looking at is an art installation. This art installation is actually made from wood with strings of LED lights. That's why the whole plastic is glowing. It's because we have LED lights behind the whole thing. And actually, we had it built inside of a mall with the help of hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, because I, as an artist, actually don't know how to build anything. So I needed to find helpers to help me bring this project to life. And then maybe the most important part is why we did it, right? Why? We did this because we wanted to show how small individual actions add up. So we collected 168,000 plastic straws over the course of 6 months and converted it into an art installation. We had to clean the straws, sort them, organize them by color, weigh them so that we knew how many there were, and convert them into an art installation. And all this was done with the help of volunteers. Right? So this entire journey, there's the art is the funnel. It's to get people interested, to get people who probably wouldn't care about conservation otherwise, to be like, huh, that's something that's really cool. And so it sort of fulfills the same purpose like one of these flowcharts, which talks about how every 60 seconds a truckload of plastic flows into the ocean, how there by 2050 there might be more plastic than fish in the sea. But like these educational pieces, while they're very important, don't necessarily connect with people on an emotional level. And the work that I do tries to bridge that gap, because we talk about how these projects are a result of concerned community members coming together to fight for something that they believe in, right? So this is a project that I did in Greece, in Corfu, with the help of Greenpeace. We landed on this island, we didn't know anyone, and we just started asking for help. This is an island with no drinking water. You can't drink the tap water. And so the government subsidizes, they help pay for bottled water. And so many people have bottles. So we went to schools and asked these kids to ask their parents to collect plastic bottles. And so many bottles came. Like we ended up with way too many bottles. And our goal was to represent, what does it mean when you say every 60 seconds a truckload of plastic flows into the ocean? What does it look like? What does it feel like? So we tied all these plastic bottles together. We brought them to various places and tried to bring to life the statistic, right? Statistics are powerful. Statistics are great, but sometimes you need to connect them to a feeling. right? And the feeling that I got from actually being in this place, trying to battle the waves and the water to keep the plastics in one place and trying to take these photographs, that feeling that you get is something that I think really art can only deliver. The other thing that I think is interesting with art is sometimes you can talk about things that are invisible. So you guys might know this, you might not know this, but the clothing that we wear, so much of the clothing that we wear today is made from synthetic materials. Polyester, nylon, spandex. You might have seen a ton of recycled clothing that is coming up, clothing that is made of recycled plastic bottles. But what happens when you take clothes and you put them in a laundry machine? And it tumbles around and it loosens and fabric just breaks off. Well, these plastic fibers get released into the water stream. Actually, 92% of tap water in the United States contains traces of microfibers. And we end up drinking that. And I wanted to find a way to represent this invisible threat. Like, look at these photos. They're so boring. So what do you do as an artist? Well, I think first you start with like where you are. So in my case, I was doing a project with the Georgetown University. They're just students. We looked around in the garbage dumps trying to figure out what we could find. We saw a lot of cardboard. So we're like, okay, we're going to use cardboard. We're going to use metal wire. We're going to use used clothing that we collected from a charity. We borrowed it from a charity. And we decided to make clothing monsters. Monsters crawling out of the laundry machine, because that's sort of what's happening, right? We put something into the laundry machine, we expect it to come out clean and fresh and beautiful, but in reality, what's coming back at us is a toxic water supply. And I just wanted to find an interesting way to strike up that conversation in a unique and interesting way. And we show how something like a laundry machine is threatening our children, our families, the people we love. Alone, it doesn't really make sense, right? It's in combination with facts that the art holds its power. And I try to do all sorts of different things, right? There's so many different issues that we can tackle. Fast fashion is one of those big issues that I think doesn't get a lot of attention. But the fashion industry is one of the largest polluting industries in the world. But once again, these facts aren't interesting. No one wants to wake up in the morning and be told, hey, do you know what? Like that dress you want to buy or that shirt you want to wear is actually destroying the planet. And you don't want to be reminded of this all the time. So how do you strike up those conversations? Well, I think once again, it's this sense of adventure. And so I try to always look for opportunities to take things that you discover along the way just by talking to people and converting them into something interesting. This is a factory in Cambodia. And we discovered it had been abandoned for over 10 years because the company went bankrupt during 2008 crash. And they had left all these scraps of clothing. They didn't pay the workers. They just shut down. They went bankrupt. And all these clothes were just left there to rot. And so we went in, did the exact same thing like we did with the straws. We collected them, sorted them in colors, started thinking about what could we build with these things? What are some stories that we can tell? And then you just come up with these opportunities to say how maybe every single time you wear a t-shirt, it's like 2,500 liters of water. That's that's how much water a human being drinks in 7 years. So one t-shirt is 7 years worth of water because cotton is so water intensive. And so that means our closet is basically like a waterfall of water. And so we need to be conscious of these things. But the art alone just really like helps ignite these conversations, whether it's to talk about deforestation or the air pollution that comes from it. I like to think of my work as just invitations to symbols. And as part of being an activist and creating work like this, I discover more causes, things I didn't know anything about. I was doing a presentation at a conference, and someone came up to me after, and they were like, "Hey, could you do a project on electronic waste?" I was like, "Wait, what is electronic waste?" Well, you know, the phones we use, the microwave, the electronics, refrigerators, like anything with like cable and circuitry is electronic waste. And everything we have today is getting smarter, right? We have smart speakers, we have smart everything. And only 15% or so of electronic waste is actually recycled. And this is not only valuable materials like gold, silver, copper, cadmium, all these materials that we're throwing away, they're also toxic. So they leach back into the water supply and they harm us. So how do we talk about that, right? And for me, I'm always looking for new opportunities to tell these stories, finding the partners that are interested in talking about the work that they're doing. And in this case, I worked with Dell Dell is kind of the largest electronic waste recycler in the world. And it just seemed like a really cool opportunity. So we went to one of their factories where they collect all this electronic waste and started planning out different concepts. I think of visual metaphors, like the opening scene of Blade Runner, which is made out of these solar panels that are just kind of flared outwards. And we just created this with chalk and rope to draw these circles on the ground and convert this thing. And how do you take all these different pieces of electronics and convert them into something that is cool? So we thought, like, why not a wall of circuit boards coming in? And then, of course, we steal visual references like Tron, where this model, like, I always love to have people in my shots. I think it's the relationship between person and object that creates the story, right? And so in this case, we have a lady representing Tron, and then the whole thing put together created this image where I hoped to represent the past powering the future. And so this is kind of the work that I do. I try to really find unique and interesting ways to invite people into the conversation to talk about things that matter. My hope is that when you look at this stuff, you go like, wow, that's cool. Like, I want to learn more. I want to understand who this person is. I want to understand what this art is. I want to understand how it's done. And that, I think, is like the power of art. So at this point, I want to kind of go backwards in time a little bit. I'd like to share with you my journey, because I know that some of the work that you look at until this point, you might be like, whoa, all right, that's very cool, but I have no idea how it's done and I don't know how I can get involved. And that's fine, because we all start somewhere. And actually, most of the lessons that I've learned in order to get me to where I am today are lessons that happened way before in my career when I was a lot younger. And so I first bought my camera back in like 2007. I picked up camera, didn't really do much with it. But over time, I like started being interested in, and I had just gone through a breakup, and I wanted to find a way to express my feelings. So I was a hard rock mining engineer at the time. And so so mining is gold, silver, copper, like, but actually like designing mines. How do you get there? How much does it cost? How do you go 2 kilometers underground and extract the material? How much is it going to cost you? So that was my day job. But on the side, I would take my camera and use it on evenings and weekends. And I had just gone through a breakup, and I was looking for a way to express myself. And I was just using myself as a model. And the best way to do that is to learn Photoshop, because Photoshop is basically a piece of software that can enable you to transform the ordinary into extraordinary. And so I tested things out. I experimented. I used myself as a model, and that's how I got started, because I was too shy to ask for anyone else. But over time, I started gaining a little bit more confidence. I dragged my friends and my family into the picture. I started learning about lighting and cameras and colors, and started putting these all together, and started focusing on how do you transform ordinary everyday places into extraordinary scenes, whether that was an excavator that I would find on the side of the road, or a piece of graffiti in the middle over here. We took newspaper, threw it up into the air, and it created this sort of cascading effect. Or my on the right side over here, that's my that's my garage. It's my shed, and just starting to collaborate with people with hair and makeup and everything like that. So it's really, this is when I started to get more and more interested, because you can start converting the world that everyone else sees into something different. And then I started adding one more layer to that, and that was special effects. There's something about trying to capture something in your camera that I found particularly intriguing. It was almost like a magic trick, where people would look at the image and they'd be like, "What am I looking at?" Right? And along the way, I learned a ton of different lessons. So like on the left side, I learned that you can use flour as a substitute. So like cooking flour as a substitute for a smoke machine. Except you just didn't want to do that inside of your own studio, because if you did that, it's impossible to clean up. So I don't recommend doing it. In the middle, we had liquid latex that we put on this person's face. And we learned that if you don't put any Vaseline underneath the eyebrows, then they're going to tear their eyebrows out when they remove it. So, and then on the right, we use birthday sparklers to do light painting. And you can do all this stuff almost on your phone these days. You don't even need to have expensive equipment, because phones have become so powerful. And so as I continuously like experimented and grew and got better at what I did, I started experimenting with different formats of storytelling. And out of all these images, there's one image in particular that stood out. One in particular that people that got published. And I was like, why? Why is that? Well, it was this one. And this is the image that got published, not because I made a mess of my friend's studio, but because we made a video. And this video just documented how we did it. You can see us tossing flour everywhere, the models dancing over and over again, and us trying to capture this exact moment. I didn't have, we just rented, we borrowed this camera, we bought this camera and returned the camera because we couldn't afford to keep it. And that's something that you can do here in Canada. And somehow it was a telling of the story behind the story itself, right? Like, so the art itself tries to tell a story, and the story of how you got there is the second story. And I would almost say that the story behind the story is the more interesting piece of the puzzle. And so I started documenting every single project I did, whether it was a success or a failure. This was this one time we tried to light this guy on fire, and it was really hard. Like, this guy just wouldn't burn properly. I know he looks like he's on fire right now, but he's not on fire properly. His whole body is supposed to be covered in flames. And so we'd go out, capture these images, show them, post them, but blogs would pick them up. People would share it. And why is that? And it took me a long time to figure this out, but the reason I think that people share things is when you create content that acts as like the guide and not the hero. Because I wasn't going around saying, look at what I did. I was creating videos that was saying, look at how I did it. If you're interested in copying it, here's how you can too. And so it was like, it had this educational value to it. It had this inspirational value to it. It had value that anyone else could take and be inspired by. And this is something that I think we forget about. Very often we create things and we want to be the hero so badly that we end up talking about ourselves. But talking about ourselves doesn't help others. It is so much more empowering to be the guide so that you can empower others to step into their own shoes to be the hero. And this is true even of like all sorts of stories. If we think of Star Wars, you have like Luke Skywalker, who's never ready for the challenges ahead. He's untrained. He doesn't know how to like, he can't defeat the big bad guy. He needs to train. He needs to get ready. He needs to be emotionally ready. And so he needs an Obi-Wan, or he needs a Yoda to be there to guide him, to help him grow and thrive. And so if you can step into the role of Yoda, that is even better than being the Obi-Wan. So I just invite you, if you're ahead on your zero waste journey, if you're ahead on whatever, if you know more about something, position yourself as the guide. Don't talk about how awesome you are. Talk about how awesome others could be if they followed you. And that shift works as well in business as it does in art, as in anything else. I think basically you want to kind of become a teacher who's done it, not just speaking about it. And so in 2012, I kind of decided to quit my day job. I woke up one day and I realized that I didn't want to be a photographer. I didn't want to be an artist anymore. I didn't want to be an engineer because, I don't know, engineering was boring. Mining was never a passion of mine. It was just what I happened to be doing. And so I decided that it would be cool to start traveling the world. And the way I traveled was by teaching. I would just say, hey, I'd like to give a workshop, just like the one I'm doing right now, in a different country. I'd reach out to a photo club or reach out to a person, and then I'd have a free plane ticket to go somewhere and teach. I'd make a bunch of friends, and I could sleep on their sofas, and we could collaborate and create images together. It was kind of magical. And the images that I created in the past started supporting the images that I created in the future. So that image I showed you of the fire guy on the bicycle, well, a pyrotechnician had reached out, saw the images online and said, it's a really nice picture, but your firework sucks. Like the quality of your fire sucks because it was like kind of burnt out, right? Like you can see there's no texture in the flame over here. And you can see in contrast, this one over here has so much texture and richness. Anyways, I saw this guy and I was like, wow, who is this guy? He knows what he's talking about. So can we work together? And he's like, I'm in France. Let me know when you come. And so I came and we worked together. And so there's something about the magic of the internet and the connection and the freedom of being able to travel, not anymore, but in the past, that I really tried to capitalize on. And I would just go around and try to bring whatever I had on my mind into life. So it was very fantastical. It was always sort of educational and inspiring. And I tried to figure out, how could I make a living as an artist? I mean, ultimately, I wasn't really making much money. I was actually earning money and then spending it back on either my trips or my equipment. And and but I was getting a lot of experience in the world. Now, there's one thing that I learned a little bit. It took me a long time to learn this, but photographers don't pay other photographers. So building an audience as a photographer for other photographers is not really helpful. I think we see this all the time, unless you want to sell courses, right? So if you're selling tutorials, if you're selling presets, if you're selling something like that, then that works. But for me, I was like, oh, I have like a market problem here. I want to reach another market. I want to reach the people who can hire me to do bigger, crazier things than I've ever done before, except I didn't know how. And this is all going to become relevant later, I think, as I turn it back into the conservation stuff. But these are lessons I learned early on before I was doing any conservation work that are still relevant, regardless of what you care about. And so, basically, I was really struggling to, find any. I was really struggling to figure out how to attract attention of people outside of the photography world. And it was only after I did this one project where I tied a model 30 meters underwater in a shipwreck in Bali that things click into place. So this project actually went viral. I was on vacation with my parents in Bali and I wanted to do something. So I got my dive certification. And then I was like, oh, if I'm going to get my dive certification, I need to see where I want to go. And it's like, oh, look, there's a shipwreck. Wait, if there's a shipwreck, I want to do a photo shoot. If there's a photo shoot, then I want to get a model. If there's a model, I need a dress. And one thing led to another. And inside of a week, we ended up pulling this project together. And it went totally viral. Like this was viral. I guess I'm a little bit old, but back in like 2013, Facebook still had trending on their sidebar. And I was trending on Facebook for the first time. And I was like, wow, what happened? Like I didn't think that like these images are pretty, they're beautiful, but they weren't necessarily more beautiful than my previous work. And so I was really curious to understand, like, what are the mechanics? Why did this one spread? And why did the others not spread? And the reason I think it spread, and the lesson that I learned from it, is that this is the first time that my photos could be described with words, right? If I said, do you want to see a photo of me tying a model 30 meters underwater in a shipwreck in Bali? It sounds interesting. But like, I don't know, if I go backwards and I say, do you want to see a photo of a girl in a big bird costume on a rock? It's just not as interesting. So a journalist doesn't write about it. There's no headlines about it. And if people can't talk about what you do in a way that feels simple and compelling, then they're not going to talk about it. And so that was the lesson I learned early on. You have to think about not just the work you're going to do, but how people are going to speak about it. If you want people to pay attention, if you want people to talk about it, you have to make it easy for people to talk about it. And so an example to highlight that was this project that I did for a company called SmugMug. They wanted to show how their employees were showing off their guns. And so we created a rain machine. So on the left side, we have the CEO. In the middle, we have the wife. And on the right, we have their head of marketing. And the goal was to just show them, looking really badass and working out. And I called it the first time the $30 trick to epic portraiture. So the $30 trick to epic portraiture means that photographers are going to be curious about this, right? Because photographers want to know how to take better portraits. But as we said earlier, photographers don't hire other photographers. So how might we spin this around? I launched this exact same project, these same photos, 9 months later. And I launched it on the 1st of January. Why the 1st of January? Because the 1st of January is when everyone makes their New Year's resolutions to go to the gym. It's what's on everyone's mind on January 1st. Is like, I want to get more fit, I want to get more healthy. And this time, instead of focusing on the end results, like what we did and how we got there, we focused on the transformation of these people from ordinary people to extraordinary athletes, right? Ordinary people, Hollywood budgets. And we relaunched the series this time focusing on this transformation of what the people look like. And this time, the project went totally viral. It hit all the health blogs. It got picked up by so many people, and there were debates on whether or not you should work out or just hire a really good photographer. So it was like this really interesting conversation that happened, and it's all with the power of the title, the power of the story. How you shape the story determines how people talk about what you do. And so if you are doing something important, you're doing something interesting, you want people to care, make it easy for them to talk about you. Ask yourself all the time, what is the headline? What is a headline? Is this something you would share? Is it something your friends will share? Is it something a journalist will share? Always think of what is the headline. Cool? All right. So I basically took my own advice. It's always funny putting something into a presentation format because it makes a lot of logical sense. But really, as you're living life, you're making a lot of mistakes along the way. But anyways, I tried a bunch of things. I tried to create the real world Beauty and the Beast in the world's largest monastic library called Stift Admont. I put superheroes on the edge of a 40-story skyscraper to show to what great heights their customers would go for their sorry so to show how to what great heights the customer support people would go for their customers. So I started to get work in this field, and things just kind of got bigger because of the firework that I had done in the past. Huawei, a cell phone company that you guys might be familiar with, decided to hire me to create a campaign for them to create the most epic and complex photo possible using a cell phone. And we created this, and then my face ended up on the side of all these billboards, and I was like, I think it was playing before some cinemas and everything like that. And it was like, oh, I think I've kind of like made it, right? Like the goal was to become a commercial photographer. The goal was to become an artist that could be paid to do what you do best. That was the dream. And it wasn't the dream for me. It was actually kind of boring because, as I started getting these bigger and bigger projects, I started to realize, like, what was I actually doing? I was actually just creating art to create conversations to sell product, right? And it didn't feel like it was going anywhere. Like, where do you go after that? You just earn more money to help other people sell more product. It didn't feel like it was truly generating value in the world. And so I had to like take a pause there and think about, what do I want to do? What were the projects that I was most proud of? And I started to think about this one project in particular that I was most excited about. And ironically, it wasn't even a photograph. It was a video that I had made for a family. And this man, Glenn O'Neill, reached out to me saying, "Hey, our daughter is dying of a terminal degenerative brain disease. And we know that you know how to make things go viral. We were wondering if you might help us make a video to raise awareness for what our family is going through in hopes that we can fund a cure." I was like, okay, tell me more. So their daughter is called Eliza O'Neill, and she was diagnosed with this thing called Sanfilippo syndrome. And so by the age of 5, she was going to like lose the ability to walk, to talk, to speak. It's sort of like a reverse children's Alzheimer's. But there was like this hope that if they could just raise enough millions of dollars, that there might be the chance that she could be treated with a viral vector. So I went there. I went in, I flew myself there. I stayed on their sofa for 10 days, made a video just to see what would happen. And over the course of a month, we raised $1 million. By the end of the year, we had raised $2 million, all with the power of a story, just a well-told story. And Eliza was actually treated a couple years later. She's the first person ever to be treated. And they continue to fight for other families now because there are a lot of different variants of the disease. And I think like it's crazy because, when we think of the power of art, I think of stories like that make me feel like I want to do more in the world, right? I think there's something really interesting about trying to combine the power of storytelling with making a difference, because then it's anchored in something real. And so I almost quit photography. I just wanted to make videos that were going to help different charities. And then I realized after doing it for about 6 months that just telling sad stories all the time just wasn't that exciting. Like it was actually quite depressing, to be honest, because I was just constantly surrounded by so much pain and suffering. And I was like, there has to be another way. And so I backtracked a little bit, and I wanted to find out, how do you combine fantasy and impact together? What might that look like? And it took a long time, but I eventually started like testing this out. I started testing out this model, and my girlfriend came up with the first idea. The idea was like, why don't we use storms as a metaphor for climate change? And this is back in like 2016 or so. I'm like, yeah, climate change is a big deal. I've seen it on the news, but I don't know exactly what's going on. So I started watching documentaries. I started learning about it, and I started realizing like, maybe this is something that I need to like try to do something about. So we decided to do a project. We went storm chasing for 2 weeks. And so that means these storms are traveling at 50 miles an hour, like almost 75, 80 kilometers an hour, and you have to race them and stay ahead of them, set up, take a picture, and pack it all back up before you get steamrolled by this storm. And we just created this series called Climate Change Doesn't Care. Climate change doesn't care what you're wearing tonight. Climate change doesn't care what's on the news. And the photos aren't like my best images. They're not the most crazy images that I have, but they showed me for the first time that it was possible to intersect fantasy and impact. Like it was possible to take something that was abstract and give it life. And I was like, there's something really interesting here. The second thing that I did was I decided to tie a model underwater with sharks swimming around. And this was when I was in Fiji. I was going there to teach a workshop anyways. And I thought, oh, you know what would be interesting? I should find something to do that would be meaningful in Fiji while I'm there, since I'm already traveling there to teach. And so I started asking around, like, what is there to do there that is interesting? And someone said, well, there's some really cool shark dives. I was like, oh, wonderful. Why don't I try to think of a concept? And I thought, okay, sharks, we kill like 100 million sharks every single year. And this is all through research. So I learn about problems as I create campaigns. Like the art that I do is an excuse for me to learn more about the world and to start championing different things. And so in this case, you know, we had to come up with, I came up with this concept of creating a shark shepherd where which, you know, if sharks are the stewards of the sea, which they are, they're the apex predator of the sea. They get rid of the sick, they get rid of the maimed, they help keep populations healthy. If we are killing 100 million of them every single year, then we're not being stewards of the sharks. So we need to become like shark shepherds, right? I just thought it would be cool. And if I already knew how to tie a model underwater, why not just tie a model underwater with some sharks swimming around, right? What better way to show that we should not be afraid of sharks than by putting a person right next to a shark? And sharks are actually not all dangerous. There are over 300 species of sharks, of which only 3 are even remotely dangerous to people. And like more people get killed by refrigerators than sharks. Like there are so few deaths by sharks. It's just that we have this weird innate fear, and probably pushed by another story like Jaws. And so these are like little white-tipped reef sharks. And because I wanted to like do a campaign, I wanted it to matter, but I couldn't find anyone to support me with this project. And I think that's because when you ask someone like whether or not you can, you know, whether or not someone's interested in participating in a project where you're tying a model underwater, they just go like, oh my gosh, this is way too dangerous. Let's not do that. So nonprofits don't really want to work with me. And so I figured I'd just do this project first. And then I'd reach out to a nonprofit after and say, hey, I created this campaign. Can I support you? And one person said yes. We got 85,000 petition signatures, sent it off to create some shark sanctuaries. And so, you know, finding different ways to be creative based on what you have, based on who you are, based on where you are and what you're able to create has been sort of the story of how I go around from project to project trying to make a difference. And I know that some of you might be looking at these projects and going like, wow, Ben, this is great. Like, how do you have the money to do all of this stuff? Like, this seems like really expensive. And these always look like, they feel like really big productions, and they sort of are, but they sort of aren't. We're really like, honestly, a loose group of volunteers coming together. Like, I don't have a crew. I am a one-person operation, and I go around and I make friends in different countries, trying my best to figure out what we can do if possible, because there is this true sense that if we just come together as people, anything is possible. And so I just want to share with you a video that shows one of these projects coming to life. How do you get people to talk about something that is ordinary, ugly, and boring? I wasn't too sure, but from experience, I know that the internet loves to see things that are extravagant, unique, and different. So applying that same concept to plastic bottles, having 10,000 of them seemed like a great start at making something ordinary into something extravagant. With more plastic than fish in the sea scheduled for 2050, it made sense to add an ocean component to the project. A sea of plastic was interesting and sad, but it needed something unique and beautiful to truly stand out. What more unique and beautiful to represent the ocean than a mermaid?
And so with the help of a waste management center called Tomra and a local artist called Cynthia, we ended up with 10,000 plastic bottles that came in a 50-foot truck, along with a beautifully designed, handmade mermaid tail. This unexpected combination, I felt, had the potential to be something truly different. So with all three components to make things shareable, the extravagant, the unique, and the different, I felt like we had all of the ingredients necessary to create something that could potentially make the boring topic of plastic pollution more shareable. As the shoot deadline creeped forward, dozens of volunteers joined us in our quest, contributing whatever they could, from helping us clean and delabel thousands of bottles, to rigging up my camera to the ceiling with plywood and pulleys, to borrowing a 52-inch TV from Costco. For the mermaid, talented artists came together to transform our beautiful model into a believable mermaid. And before I knew it, all the pressure was on me, waiting to see if the concepts would work or just be flushed down the drain. As the day flew by, volunteers worked tirelessly, pushing bottles around, collecting them, organizing them by color before tossing them right back out onto the floor to create a new set of patterns that some crazy photographer had told them to do. Slowly but surely, an extravagant, unique, and different series appeared, just like I had hoped. But deep in the back of my mind, one nagging thought remained. How much difference could a series like this possibly make in encouraging people to stop using plastic bottles? Honestly, I'm not sure, but I guess I'm about to find out.
Alrighty. Little break from my face, always good. So that project ended up getting 37 million views or so. And and it's funny because, you know, you create these things as an artist and that's really all you can hope for. There's this sense like, how can I create something that will just touch people? But even if you do, even if it gets a lot of views and likes and shares, you realize like that isn't everything, right? Like that's not the only goal. The goal is actually to move people, to change them, to transform the way they feel about things. And that's a hard one to measure. Like, how do you know when you've been successful? Anyways, I'm gonna touch on that topic just in a little bit. But that this project, you know, the reason I wanted to show that video is just so you could see how, I guess, for lack of a better word, how ghetto everything was. Like, yes, we had a big art installation, a big warehouse, but like I got the warehouse for free. I got all the volunteers for free. All the artists worked for free. The bottles I got for free, and I returned them back to where they came from. You know, the only thing that this project cost me was pizza to feed like every single person who was on the project, to help me clean all of this stuff. And it's really surprising what you can do when you come up with a dumb idea that people can rally behind on, right? And then you might have noticed that I'm always looking for different and interesting ways to highlight stories, right? Everything from the pulleys. There are so many other ways to do this, so many other ways to take the shots, but you want to make it an interesting story. And so, you know, this is something that I've kind of kept doing regardless of the projects that I work on. You know, even with this electronic waste project that I did with Dell, you know, we have a person behind the model with an air blower. There's a drone on top of this photograph to kind of show how the shot was taken. There's a light hanging on a drone in order to create the image. And anyways, so I was kind of doing these projects, and over time I started getting more requests. People wanted to, you know, to invite me to make a difference, or sometimes they wouldn't. You know, Nike once came to me and said like, hey, we want you to take some photos to promote our latest, greatest shoes. We're going to use Instagram influencers. I know there's no impact in it. Are you okay with doing it anyways? And I was like, but why not do something with impact? Like, why not celebrate social entrepreneurs instead of Instagram models? Because those are the people that we should emulate and celebrate. And I'm sure you as an organization sponsor all these really cool people. Why don't we celebrate those people instead? And they said, sure, that sounds great. And it's a better story. So we created this image, you know, with them running on the side of buildings, 40 stories up in the air. And it's just cool to be able to do this stuff. And then over time, I started to realize, you know what, I'm doing all these photographs. They take so much time, so much energy, so much effort to create these big sets. Like, what happens if I create a set, but I let everyone else take photos in it? Isn't that more interesting? Because now you give everyone the power with a phone, with a camera, to tell stories that matter to them. And so this project that I created in Singapore out of 18,000 plastic cups, in collaboration with the Canadian High Commission, this is another project that was sponsored by the government of Canada, to create this project, and give everyone a voice, because that's what like art is about, right? It's this democratization of art that is so powerful. And so that was kind of the track that I was on. But then, of course, COVID happened, and and no one's gathering together, no one's creating art installations, no one's creating experiences. And so I'm kind of back on this track of trying to figure out what to do with myself. There's this Japanese word called ikigai, and ikigai is the intersection of what you love, what you're good at, what you can get paid for, and what the world needs. And I think in a sense, I thought I had found that, right? Like what I loved was like creating stories that mattered. What I was good at was taking these fantastical surreal images. The world clearly needed more art that focused around environmental and social issues, and I could actually start getting paid for it from time to time. Like it felt like a really good balance. But then suddenly the world decided to shut down, and now everything that I felt like I was good at I could no longer do. Then what do I do with myself, right? It's kind of like this journey of how do you fit in. And so in a way, I was like sort of in this state of crisis, and I probably still am where I am today now. I mean, COVID is not over. The world is not stopping to change, and the world's probably never going to stop changing. But like in this word of like crisis, there's something, if you break the crisis word down into Chinese characters, crisis is made out of two words. There's danger on the left character, and then there's opportunity, which is the right character. And so what this says, I think, is like in times of crises, like let's say you're on the edge of a cliff and you're about to be pushed off. The closer and closer you get to the edge of that cliff, the more opportunities you start seeing to save yourself, right? You'll see little branches that you can grab onto. You might start seeing a path. The cliff might look a little less steep because now you have more perspective. And so in every crisis, there's opportunity. You just have to be ready for it, and you have to look for it, and you have to hunt it down. And so, when I was thinking about this particular crisis of COVID, and I was looking back in my life, I realized that, I've always been sort of facing crises in different moments in my life. So like, if I recap sort of the story that I told you, back in 2012, I was taking beautiful images. They were fantastical. They were kind of like this. And I couldn't figure out how to connect with the people who would actually pay me, right? Like I was building an audience of photographers, but I hadn't figured out actually how to make money. And so that is a crisis, right? When you're an artist who doesn't know how to make money, that's kind of a crisis. And I was there, I bumbled around, I figured out a new formula, I worked at it, and I managed to get work. And then I started having clients. This was a project that I did for a whiskey company. We're underwater in a cenote in Mexico. This is 30 meters underwater. We created this underwater set trying to celebrate Chinese culture with a cormorant fisherman on top of this toxic layer of hydrogen sulfide, which is what looks like that misty thing. And it was like, cool, I can actually get paid to do this stuff. This is wonderful. But like, where's the impact? How am I changing the world with the work that I'm doing? And it just felt like, okay, that is another crisis, right? Like, because my values weren't embedded in the work that I was doing. I was losing motivation to create what I wanted to create. And then, when I started to try to do stories of impact, I started to do it in a way that was, I guess, irresponsible and selfish. Like I just wanted to make a difference, and I didn't really care how. And so I did this project where I went to Bhutan with one of my friends, and we decided to take a photo series. Now, I've always felt like if the world just traveled more, if they went out and saw how diverse and different their fellow human beings were, but how similar we all are at the same time, then the world would become a better place. So what if, and this is just me being like terrible storyteller, I wasn't really thinking about it. I was like, if only people could see how special the world is, we could go to like a really exotic place and show how it looks just like a movie. So it's an invitation to step into a movie. So I go off with my friend who just happens to look like a white Jesus. And we go to Bhutan and we take these photographs, and this photo just ends up looking like a colonial photograph where this guy is trying to either appropriate culture or steal culture. Anyways, it looks terrible from a story perspective because it's just not culturally sensitive. And so although the photos are beautiful, the story doesn't fit together because I didn't take the time to think. And so it took a long time to figure out, how do you calibrate what you're good at, telling these fantastical stories and actually making an impact on the world, right? So that again was like me in a state of crisis, like not figuring out, how do I tie impact? How do I tie change with what I actually know how to do? And then over time, I started to figure this whole thing out, and I was like, okay, I did this project with Greenpeace, like I shared with you. I can show photos that tell stories that are, beautiful and impactful, and I can get paid a little bit to do it. And so now we've got like the money piece, we've got the impact piece, we've got the, a little bit of notoriety piece, we've got a little bit of experience. It's all been coming together. But guess what? This is something I'm sure every single artist may feel, every single person with a phone might feel, is that the world is a really noisy place. When you have something to say, it's getting harder and harder to say it. It's getting harder and harder for people to see it. And the value of each individual piece of content is shorter and shorter, right? So that means every single project that takes me months and months to create is valuable for a shorter and shorter period of time, right? Like it's only good for like 24 hours or something. And I was like, man, I need to change. I need to do something differently, right? So I'm like, okay, photography, if I want to make a living with just photography, this might not work. And so that's like a crisis too, because the world is changing around you. The 10,000 hour rule by Malcolm Gladwell, which is like, if you put 10,000 hours into something, you can become an expert at it. That is only true if the world around you doesn't change. So like, I will always know how to take a photograph because I've practiced it, but I can never be an expert marketer because the ecosystem in which you're marketing is constantly changing. And so as an artist who needs to be discovered, who needs to be hired, that ecosystem, that environment is constantly changing. And so there's this like unraveling of the fabric. It's constantly having, and it's almost like a race. So you have to keep up, and you have to say, what am I going to do next? How am I going to stay relevant? How am I going to serve? How am I going to make a difference? And so for me, I was like, okay, I need to make art installations. I'm gonna make these big, huge art installations, and I don't need to take photos. Like, screw the photos part of it, because like the photos aren't valuable anymore. No one values photos. I'm just gonna create experiences. People can come, they can take photos, and I'm gonna talk about causes. And so I did this one project in Egypt called The Tallest Closet in the World, and I wanted to put how many clothes a single person uses over the course of their lifetime. It was 30 feet tall. It was huge. And I was like, if I create this once, then it can travel the world. That way I can design something just once, and it can go to place to place to place, and it can continuously have an impact. At least that's how it worked in my mind. And then I learned really quickly that actually creating this thing once was really difficult, and recreating it again is the same amount of work than the first time it is, basically. And because I thought that the photography part of it wasn't important, I didn't really take any photos. I just have this one photo of me jumping in my art installation that I thought would be cool. And so I have very little to show for this project. I mean, I have a video that shows how it was built, but that was it. And it was just like, wait a minute. I can't just create art installations and make them travel, because I, as a human being, don't like doing the same things over and over again. I like to do different things. And so that didn't work too, right? And so that was another crisis. I was like, wait, what is the business model? How am I going to survive? And so, the interesting thing is, okay, when we're living through moments of crises, they feel terrible. Like, we honestly feel like everything is the end of the world. It's a struggle, and it feels really, really long. But when you take a little bit of a bird's eye view, I think things change. So this photo over here is my life in dots. So every dot represents a week, I think. Maybe it's a couple weeks. Anyways, the way it's divided is like the red is like the first 5 years of my life. The orange is until I, quit my day job in 2012. Yellow is me trying to figure out how to make money as an artist. Green is me trying to figure out how to make a difference as an artist. And teal is, which is like the kind of the bottom row, is like COVID. And when you look at this, you realize that like most of the crises that I just talked about actually take place inside like the yellow and the green section. And it's like not that long. but basically, when I look at my life from this perspective, I realize like I am always in a state of crisis. Like, I'm literally, every time I just think I figure something out, it's the end of the world, because something has changed in either my life or the world that makes it so that what I thought I knew, I didn't really know anymore. And when you have this perspective, you start to realize like, actually, you know what? Maybe things aren't so bad. Because maybe what it means to survive as an artist is to consistently be adapting, consistently be looking to do better, to do more, because that's what makes good art. That's what makes a life well lived. If you're always doing what you always know how to do, then you're never going to get anywhere, right? And so for me, COVID has been an interesting thing. And the reason I guess I want to talk about this is like, I think we spend too much time talking about only our successes, right? And I feel like it's kind of rare to have people stand up talking about how they're struggling. And so, you know, for me, COVID has been really difficult because obviously what I'm really good at, what I'm known for, what I'd like to do, how I earn money, all those are things that have completely disappeared. My ability to make a difference in the world has changed. And so the question that I found to be really helpful to ask myself is like, what can I do now that I couldn't do before? And this was an opportunity for me to slow down and maybe think about like, well, what can I do differently? What if I just took a moment to stop thinking about the world and just like start thinking about the people that are close to me? So I did this one project on TikTok that I'm going to share.
This is my mom, and since quarantine, she's been getting creative. Because I'm a photographer and my sister is 8 months pregnant, she asked if we could do a maternity photo shoot, but with fruits and vegetables. What? I know, crazy. Here's the story. It all started with my dad eating corn and mom noticing that corn looked like skyscrapers. So I came up with a master plan, got my sister and her husband to copy some poses from Instagram, and got to work. I selected the best poses so that we could print, cut, and attach their tiny little silhouettes to a little piece of wire, while mom focused on world building. Once our little city was set up, all we had to do was create a sunset using a little orange pouch and a phone light.
A little higher.
Done. Unfortunately for me, mom is now excited, and she's discovered that pomegranates look really interesting from the inside, and my sister wants more photos too. Like for part 2.
So this was an opportunity to try something different, right? Like, you know, I hadn't gone on TikTok for a while, or forever, really. And I thought, you know, there's a lot of things going on there. I wanted to see whether or not I could, you know, take the opportunity to spend time with family and do something. And then, so we made this video, and then boom, it got 4 million views. And now I'm an influencer on TikTok. Like, okay, that was kind of fun. You know what? And I got to spend some time with my family. I got to play around. I got to test something new. And so sometimes it's just about slowing down and testing and making something new, and wonderful things can come out of it. The other thing that I tried during quarantine, I was like, you know what? I'm spending so much time talking about the things that I care about. What if I took some time to listen? And I decided to start a podcast. This podcast is called Impact Everywhere. It explores positive impact in unexpected places. And as I was kind of like, you know, launching these podcasts, I started realizing, well, every episode needs some art. What if I start creating like miniature pieces of art, miniature art installations out of paper, just to see what could happen? And so this is like my very messy room. You can see a little piece of it, as well as an art installation I built. And along the way, for each and every one of these people that I was interviewing, I created these art installations, these miniature art installations. I thought like, oh, you know what? Maybe these could be like really big one day. It's kind of cool. And so, you know, besides talking to NASA scientists, toy designers, chefs that were trying to feed the homeless, youth activists, spoken word poets, people who studied fiction, all these different people that I could learn from and be inspired by, I also, you know, figured out that I could create something new. And I've kind of stopped doing this now because I realized it was taking so much time to do the art installations, but now I know how to do it, right? So I've been practicing to do things that I wouldn't normally do. And so I guess for me, there's always been this constant reminder to remind myself that a crisis is sort of relative, right? Like my crisis of like not having work is not an existential one. A crisis, a real crisis, is maybe like the story that I heard from one of my friends who was mentoring these little kids in Rwanda. And so a crisis is like when schools close down and you lose your only meal, and then you're in quarantine inside of a house that doesn't have electricity and is a thatched roof. Because if you have food, if you have shelter, if you have health, if you have love, you're not really in a crisis. You're in a position of privilege to help those in crisis. And so for me, I've been trying to find different ways through what I know how to do to help people to take action, because the greatest antidote to feeling helpless is to take action. And although sometimes I think it feels a little bit hard, you kind of wonder, like, what do you do now? Like, how am I being as effective as I used to be? There's some like interesting things that can happen once in a while. And I'm going to end on this like one final little story. So in the beginning, in January of this year, I got a message on Instagram. Someone said like, "Hey, I just want you to know someone's been copying your concept on Instagram," and I just thought like it would be good for you to know. Maybe you can go like chase after them and complain or something. And I was like, "Wait, I'm curious. Like, who's copying me? I want to see this." And it turns out that someone like dressed up as a mermaid and went onto this beach in Bali. And this, by the way, for those of you who don't know, is like a yearly occurrence. So like every single year in January, this happens on the Badung coast. 250 tons of waste are collected daily in an attempt to clean up this like terrible amount of pollution that's happening. While the typical like rainy day season is about 50 tons per day. And so it's like absolutely atrocious. Like it's sad, it's terrible. And this one person who is actually like a zero waste activist decided to go out and do something. She decided to go and tell that story. And so she created this image that was like this. And I was like, wow, this is great. You know, I think as an artist, maybe there's a little bit part of you that's like, oh no, someone's kind of copying me. But as an activist, you're like, oh man, I wish the whole world would copy me. And to like refresh your memory, like this is kind of work that I was creating. So I created all these photos and they were beautiful. And then all these bottles, I created them inside of like this warehouse, right? Like me, it was controlled. Me, it was not the same. And so, you know, it's cool that someone else is copying me. And sure, at the end of the day, like, what do I have to show for this? Well, all I know, like, I don't know what difference I've made. I just know that I've gotten it covered on a bunch of different news articles and this is fun and all. But these aren't like the news articles that are the most exciting to me. Like these are cool because it's good to know. Like this is oddly enough what people care about is like where you've been published, how many views you've gotten. But the articles that are even more interesting are the ones that aren't about you. And so like a week ago, in February, on the 21st of February, I received this 16th of February, I received this notification in my email inbox from a journalist that I was like, hey, why, like Vice didn't write an article on me. Why am I getting this notification? And it's basically this lady, Wong Ning, started a fashion company all the way in Wuhan out of recycled plastic bottles. And the reason she started this company, now they hire 10 employees. The reason she started this company is because she had seen my photographs. And so like the ripple effect of the work that you create, even though most of the time you'll never see the repercussions of what you do. Like, I don't know what me sharing my work with you today will ever do, because the chances are whatever impact it's had, I'm never going to hear about it. But you have to kind of believe that as you navigate the world, as you make decisions, as you talk to people, you are making a difference on people. You are having a ripple impact on others, even though you don't know what it is. And for me, that tool, the way I make a difference is through art. And I think what's really, really interesting is that this series of images that I created, right? Those mermaids on 10,000 plastic bottles, that was created in 2016. Yet here we are today in 2021, 5 years later, and you can still see those ripples. And it's not just because my art is unique, but because art is like this infinite resource. Art is something that can never be used up. It doesn't matter how many people see it or don't see it. It can always give more. And there's something really, really powerful to that. And so I would invite you guys to all remember that you too, you as an individual, are also an infinite resource. You're there to give, you're there to support, and that your ripples will spread across the world. And I believe that all of us together can always make a difference. And we don't know what's going to happen, but we all need to try. So with that being said, that is the end of my presentation. I'm 6 minutes over. Oh, but that's because we started 6 minutes late, so I'm totally on time. So thank you so much for listening to me. I would love if you had any questions. I'm here for the next little while, so I'm happy to answer any questions, comments, or otherwise that you have. If you want to reach out, you can see case studies on unforgettablelabs.com. You can see my podcast at impacteverywhere.org. You can reach out to me with any questions on vonwong.info. Maybe one day I'm going to end up in Sri Lanka. Who knows? It would be really cool. I've never been. But thank you guys all for your attention today. It's been a blast. All right, I'm going to press stop share now.
Thank you, Benjamin, for that really wonderful and powerful and moving presentation. I think the music also added to the ambience. I'm sure we will have a lot of questions coming in from the audience after that. And I'm sure you've inspired a lot of young people who have joined this call today, this meeting, to tell creative stories in a creative way. So as we move into this Q&A, you can type in your questions on the chat box as we normally do during these sessions. But I would also encourage all the participants in this meeting today to raise your hand and switch on your video and come out and ask your question verbally, because I know Benjamin likes to hear our voices and see the faces as well. So it would be wonderful if you guys can engage actively in the second part of the session.
I'm scared.
If anyone has a question, please feel free to raise your hand and we will come to you. In the meantime, whilst we wait for others to ask some questions, we were just wondering, in terms of, I know you just spoke about the impact of the plastic bottle campaign. Are there any other positive outcomes that have come out as a result of this work? Something that's had a conservation or environmental outcome, especially something that's positive? Anything you could share?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that's sort of the problem, is you don't know how deep the impact goes. All you know is what people tell you. So you'll have people talk about their individual stories on how it's changed the lives of their kids. You'll have teachers that are reaching out and connecting, asking for different like whether or not they can teach it in their schools. You have like, I mean, those images were picked up to be used as a stamp for the United Nations, and it's just like, I don't know what it actually changes, because that's sort of like, that's the problem with art. Like, I don't know, after doing this presentation today to the 50 people in the room, like, what has it changed? And the thing is, I think we might think about change a little bit too mathematically, right? We think of change as binary, like a 0 or a 1. But I think change is a journey. So if we think of it, if we take like the analogy of ice turning to water, that only happens at 0 degrees. But if today everyone in this room was at like -20 degrees, and I got you from -20 to -10, that 10-degree shift is also change. It's just invisible change, right? And so art sort of plays this invisible role of moving people from one state into slightly another. And it's kind of like what you hope to do as artists, as storytellers, as human beings, is just to influence people just a little bit and to hopefully move them in the right direction. Now, one thing I am trying to do a little bit more of, but this is really hard, as I'm sure you can attest to, is to start collaborating deeper with policymakers, because you want to connect with people who are actually on the ground doing the change. You want to connect with grassroots organizations that feel empowered to do something with the art. But getting to those conversations is really hard, because many organizations operate in silos, right? We work in silos, and so I would love to work with more scientists. But where do I find the scientists? Well, they're in like their science conferences, or like I want to work with more organizations, but they're in their organization conferences. And so what I try to do is I just try to have conversations with as many people as possible, because that's sort of like you in order to get involved in the design phase of something, you kind of need to like earn it. You need to work your way into it, and it's a little bit tough. So it requires a little bit of work. So yeah, I hope that's an answer. I think Satya has her arm up.
Yeah,
Satya?
I've unmuted Satya. Satya, welcome to switch on your video if you like.
Hello.
As well.
Yeah, I'm not sure how good the lighting is. Oh, it's not letting me.
No worries.
It's okay.
I love your accent.
Thank you. So I think the work that you do is amazing. I just wanted to say that it's amazing. It's beautiful as well. I just wanted to ask: is there any? Are you planning on doing any art with like trees, or like in the future?
I've been something I really want to do, and I haven't had the opportunity to yet, because I always need to find the right partners in order to do projects. Is I've wanted to make living art installations. I think that would be so cool. I wanted to create an underwater living art installation out of corals. And I came up with a whole concept, but it costs so much money and it takes so much time. And so finding the right partners is really hard. I've always thought it'd be really interesting to also create like something really large and cool by that could paint a pattern with a drone by planting trees in a very specific pattern. And I've always thought that would be really cool. But like, once again, people like to say, oh, you just need to dream big and then anything's possible, and then you figure out how to do it. But I found that to be false. I think when you're in the business of creating things that haven't been done before, everyone asks you to dream big and then they slap you with reality. And so it ends up being like a really frustrating process. And so I personally really like to think about stuff seriously once the constraints are in place. So if someone comes and says like, oh, this is how much money we have, this is what we're trying to do with it, what is possible, I feel like those conversations always go better than the ones that come and say, dream anything. And then you like spend months dreaming and then they're like, sorry, we have like $1,000. And you're like, okay, never mind.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's been
I
my
think
problem.
right now Sri Lanka's like the amount of deforestation happening here at the moment is insane, and we're trying to do as much as we can to do about it, to like raise awareness about it, and you know, I think it's a huge topic. Like they're cutting down places for animals to cross, which could create human and animal conflict, and it's just a massive point that we need to fight, and I think it would be amazing if there could be something like if you could raise awareness about Sri Lanka.
Yeah, so one of the things that I've been trying hard to do in these conversations with people is to figure out what is the solution that you're trying to drive for,
Yeah.
and how is that solution something really exciting and really obvious. And so generally my workflow to doing any project is just spending a lot of time in conversation with people to figure out how I can support. And very often, you know, I think the power lies in the local community, and lies with
Yeah.
like people like you who are on the ground, who are fighting to bring something to life. And so if there's anything I can do, at least just to start conversations, definitely feel free to reach out. I'd be happy to kind of brainstorm and see, because ultimately, like I said in the presentation, I don't know how to do anything. Like I just find people who know how to do things that are more qualified than me, but I just do all the like the thinking and coming up with dumb ideas and figuring out how like unexpected connections can happen. So my superpower is like the invisible glue in between the people, but the people are always local. All the projects I do, I go there and I work with the local community to figure out what's possible. And in places like Sri Lanka, I would assume it's like a lot cheaper to get something done than it would be in Canada or in the US with a lot less regulation. And so in so many ways, I feel like you have this quote unquote superpower that would be really interesting to develop.
Yeah, I'm only 13, so I'm not.
That's even better.
See,
because the younger you are, the more inspiring it is to see you stand up. I mean, that's one, like if Greta Thunberg was 34 years old, it wouldn't be like, people would just be like, this person's crazy. Because she was young, it worked really well. And so I think as youth, you have, and if you have something that you believe in, you're able to vocalize it and you're able to make a stance for it, it is very, very powerful. So I wouldn't let your age discourage you. If anything, I think it's a superpower. Like everything you do at this age is more inspiring. I mean, at 13, I was doing nothing with my life. So, so you're way ahead already just by even being in this conversation.
Yeah, it was amazing to join. I'm so glad I did.
Yeah. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Like I said, so vonwong.info is like a contact form. You guys feel free to fill it out. Be more than happy to talk. Oh, the whole family's there. What's up?
Yeah.
Wonderful. But yeah, feel free to reach out if there's anything I can do to help. I think it's always about finding the right allies. You know, all the projects that I've ever done, they all start with like one grassroots organization on the ground that really cares, that wants the change, and has done the work to build the connections. It isn't so much about just standing up and saying, hey, there's a problem. It's about saying, hey, here's a problem. These are the stakeholders. This is what we care about. This is what we'd like to see happen. And that sort of builds the momentum. It's the sort of the scaffolding for change to happen. And if you find those allies and you can become ambassadors for them, and you can help them tell their story in a way that's never been told before, then I think that's where magic can happen.
I agree.
Yay!
Fantastic, Satya, for you coming on and asking these wonderful questions and engaging.
Thank you.
There are some questions coming in on the chat box, Benjamin.
Yes.
How do you make sure that in the art stories that you're telling isn't from a single point of view, and that you capture the complexities of a problem. Lifestyle change of not using plastic is easy for some of us, but then there are also communities that rely on plastic to transport their water, their food, access to water, meds, etc., to support their livelihoods. So how do you like integrate that in your storytelling?
It's a great question.
Complexities.
As an artist, I mean, there's only so much an image can tell. I think the work that I create is not about being prescriptive. It's not telling you what to do. It's sort of it's shedding a spotlight on an issue and a concern. And how that is interpreted by people, I think, is completely up to them. I've seen people like interpret my art in all sorts of different ways, the same way art and stories are always interpreted. But what I do try to do is that in the storytelling of the I try as much as possible to talk about why this is an important topic and less about what you need to do in order to fix it. This is something that I'm trying to change. So in one way, I think artists creating work that resonates very broadly is moving the responsibility of change onto the people who are looking at it, right? It's like saying, I spoke from my heart now. I hope you're touched. Now you do whatever you want with it. And I think that's a little bit lazy, but it's because it's really hard to tell a complete story. And so the more complete story that I would like to work toward, and the one that I'm always aspiring to, is telling a story of change, of local change. So it's basically by saying, let's create a story with a specific goal in mind where success is very measurable. It's saying, oh, I want to find the Satya of my town who is fighting in her school to change a policy in her school and giving the awareness to this one person in order to make change happen, right? Like that, then that local story that you can elevate to now a success story if they become supported because you're bringing a lot of attention to them, can then grow into a global story because now you have a local story that becomes a template for global change. And I think that's like ultimately what I would like aspire to do, to make sure that the story is relevant to the locality of where the story is happening, right? Because that's what proper design should be or should look like. But it's something that I am not always able to do because the person who's paying for the project comes with certain constraints. So I just try to do the best that I can is really what I'm trying to say. But I try to leave my art open-ended enough so that anyone can use it in a way that they feel works for them. And so I love collaborating with other nonprofits who will come on and use my images and tell their stories in their own way, who come up with different guides. I try to link to as many resources as possible when I do these things. But you're absolutely right. The truth of the solution is different from everyone. On my end, I've actually shifted a lot from in terms of waste to thinking about the consumer responsibility. I'm also trying to think of the producer responsibility. So how do you get these companies to start pushing for new innovative materials that aren't that are more sustainable for the world? And so I think there's like a tension between these two. On one hand, we need to make sure that we don't encourage a culture of consumption. And that's a really hard task to push up against because literally the entire advertising industry, which is like $200 billion, is pushing for you to buy more stuff all the time that you don't need, that won't make you happy. and then on the other side, so on one side, this is something that we can control, is like, how do we consume less? And I think that this idea of consuming less is often seen as like protective. We need to consume less to protect the world. And that's one way of looking at it. Another way of looking at it is that by not consuming so much, you are investing in a future for hope. You're investing in the future, and it is an act of resistance to drink out of a tumbler instead of drinking out of a plastic bottle, to say, I believe that the future is something worth protecting, and I'm going to take a stance, and I'm going to fight for something that I believe in. And I think there's something that's really interesting on that front. And then on the other side, you have like companies. You need to do better. We need to design things better. And so I'm involved in kind of like both of these sides, and I'm trying to bring them closer together. But I don't have the magical solution either, because I'm just one person trying to do my own thing and trying to make a living, and also trying to like connect all these dots together. So don't really have an answer, but it's definitely the same kind of questions that I'm asking for myself. It's a really great question, by the way. And I'm seeing like Udishika is like 9 years old and Satya was 13. So I'm like, I don't know who asked the question, but like, are they like 12? Because I was not asking questions at this age that were so smart. It took me a long time to get there. You guys are awesome.
Have you ever worked through the schools and education systems with your work, Benjamin?
I would love to, but it's really hard to work with schools. I think it's because I don't have kids, so I don't have like an immediate connection to a school. I've worked like tangentially with schools, so we'll like work with a nonprofit that'll be connected with a school who will send a bunch of volunteers who will come and like participate and help. But it's usually more tangential than direct, unfortunately. Hopefully.
All right, I think we've gotten one more raised hand. We've gotten Siobhan who wants to ask a question.
Hello.
Unmute her.
Uh-oh, she's muted. We can't hear her.
Can I be heard?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I can't have my camera on, but I have like 3, maybe actually 4 questions. But like the first is, so I'm an artist as well. I'm doing animation. So I wanted to ask you, like as an artist, we tend to ideate much faster than we can execute. So have you ever had like too many ideas and maybe not enough time to execute all of them? How do you navigate and choose, okay, which ones are actually possible and which ones you want to do but you can't afford it? And how do you make sure that when an opportunity arises, like let's say a certain crisis is brought to light, that you can take up that opportunity within the time frame that you have?
Okay, so those were 2 questions, right?
Yeah.
And then you said you had 4?
Yeah, I'll ask those afterwards.
Okay, cool. So I personally don't have that many ideas because I'm not creative. I mean, like I know my work looks creative, but I'm extrinsically inspired. So I don't take showers and come up with ideas. I have conversations with people. I learn about an issue, and through the conversation, develop an idea that is often bound by the constraints of the person that I'm talking to. And so I think I think a little bit more like a designer than an artist. That being said, what I do have is a graveyard of ideas. So it's ideas I've developed with people and that went nowhere. And I have a lot of those. And so what does that mean? That just means that I have sort of this, creativity is not linear. It's cyclical. So this graveyard can be recycled, and maybe they don't recycle on a 1-to-1 ratio. Like they don't look exactly the same when they come back to life on the other end. But you'll steal elements from past inspirations that kind of come back around. So I certainly have that. I think my problem is I tend not to remember what ideas I had in the past. And so one of the things that I've tried to do is like I have like a folder of like little doodles and sketches that I try to like collect them in so that I can like look back and be like, oh yeah, I had all these ideas. They were so great and they never happened. So I try to have that. So there's a graveyard of lost ideas as opposed to ideas I want to do and haven't done yet. Primarily because I find it very depressing to develop ideas and pour time and energy and effort into dreaming. I prefer pouring my time, energy, and effort into solving problems. And so I think they're just 2 very different creative strategies. As for like making sure that an opportunity isn't lost, I mean, I don't think you can really like know, like just like you can never know who's going to be a good friend. Like you might meet someone and be like, oh, I should invest time with this person because they're really lovely. I think it's the same with projects. You just never know. You can only try to be as ready as you can. And so in times of silence where no one wants to hire you and no one thinks you're interesting and no one's asking you to come do presentations, I think it's about having the foresight to remember that those moments of silence are opportunities for preparation, and that you have to almost have this faith that so long as you keep sending bottles out, like little letters that you put inside of a bottle and you toss it out into sea, that they'll eventually all come back to you, that these sort of messages will return. And I think you kind of have to hold that sense that, you know, opportunities will also keep coming. We look at life and oftentimes, you know, even the bad things that happen to us are the reasons we are, wonderful humans that we are today. So we learn from the bad things, we learn from the good things, the things that we missed out on might open up an opportunity for something else. So I think it's just having faith that it's all going to work out in like a non-religious way. I don't think it's a religious thing. I think it's literally just, there's no right or wrong way to live life. There's just you, life, and the decisions and the consequences of the actions that you take, and they can always be positive. I don't know. Is that too philosophical? It's not really practical.
Yeah, no, it made a lot of sense. And in terms of shading down yourself from like going a little too far in things that are not going to happen, it makes sense. And my other two questions were like, have you ever handled multiple projects at the same time? And have you actually or maybe considered supervising projects offsite?
Yeah. So I generally have like, I don't know, I think right now I have like 6 projects in different stages of ideation. I think I'm always scheming. Like I'm always planning. I'm always testing the waters with different things. And I think 99% of the projects that I think I'm going to do never go anywhere. So I always have overlapping projects. When it comes to like these big campaigns that I've shown you, there's usually only one happening at a time that is like active on the ground, but that doesn't mean there aren't like planning things that are going on. I would love to actually shift into more of a creative director or art director role, because I think that a lot of time is lost by having to be the person to execute. But it's really hard to find those opportunities and to find really the right kind of team that you would jive for, because oftentimes people want you. So in my case, people want me because they look at my videos and they're like, wow, I like the video. I want a video. I'm like, yeah, but for you to have a video, like that needs my face. And then I need to direct the thing. I need to be there. I need to travel there, build this thing. But I have started getting some requests lately, especially from places like China, who are like, hey, we want to create an art installation inside of this mall. Like, can you supervise it? Can you send us the plans? But invariably, the problem that I've encountered with those people is that they're just looking for like a widget. They're not looking for actual change. And so it's like, the first question that I'll ask is like, cool, where are you getting your materials from? And they're just like, oh, we thought you would find a way to like do that part of it. And it's like, yeah, but that's like a big part of the equation. That's figuring out, what you're collecting, why you're collecting it, how is this going to make a difference? What kind of change are you going to attribute to it? Like, is the mall going to do anything differently with this? Are we trying to change the mentality of the mall too? What about all the restaurants that are surrounded by the mall? Are they going to participate in this? Or is this just going to be something to like make everyone feel bad and point the finger back at the consumer? So like, I feel like a lot of companies within the events and entertainment space don't tend to think about the actual change and transformation they want. And I think it's because the metrics for success are very different for different people. So my metric for success is like this idea of impact and change and transformation. I want people to change as a result of it. I want the world to change. I want policies to change. But oftentimes, a lot of these companies, they just want a lot of Instagram photos. They want a lot of people to talk about it. They want a lot of press mentions. And that's like the wrong metric for success. And so most of my time is spent like re-educating people and telling them like, hey, you're thinking about this wrong. And it's just kind of annoying. But I haven't figured out how to solve that problem yet. So if you have any ideas, do let me know.
There's another question that has come into the chat box, and this kind of builds on what Satya asked you earlier as well. Any tips on best ways to raise awareness on issues like deforestation and habitat destruction through art?
I mean, so my guess is that there's no shortage of art and deforestation, right? Like if you go on Google and you type art and deforestation, there's no shortage of that. But what there's probably a shortage of is stories of art and deforestation that have led to some change. And so I think think of art as one piece of a story. Think of art as a catalyst for transformation and change. Like if you created a piece of art that converted into a sticker that people could use as public signs of protest, that they could go and just like take over an entire neighborhood, or even it was just these little pamphlets that you put on cars, and you created enough of a stir because you did this every single day for 6 months on the cars of the government officials in front of parliament for whatever, like, I don't know, I'm just spitballing random ideas here. But like, if you can convert that art into a conversation, if you can convert that art into a moment in time, if you can convert that art, or you can fuel something, that's when the art becomes more of a symbol. Right? It becomes a flashpoint in time. If you can create art and you can do it from like the top down or the bottom up. So bottom up is like sort of these guerrilla campaigns that I was kind of talking about, where you're trying to spark a conversation, spark a moment in time, create something that the news stations have to cover because it's so weird and so different and so outrageous that they have to talk about it. Or you do it the other way around, where you're taking cabinet ministers and you're creating this gallery exposition or this experience that they have to go through because you had some context and you're able to like tie policy into change, and you can do it from that direction too. So I think there's a lot of like ways to do it. The question is more like, how does what you do fit into the change you want to see in the world? And certainly sometimes I think we get very caught up as individuals. Like, I think we watch a lot of movies and we want to be the hero. We want to be the one to make the entire change possible, change happen. But sometimes it's about like thinking a little bit smaller than that. It's not about changing the entire system. It's changing one key piece of the system. Think of it like a domino, and like you have the ability to influence just a couple things, a couple tiers next to you. Sometimes you get lucky and this whole chain of dominoes is really long, but chances are it's more like you're just going to make a little section of this thing kind of topple over. And if you can kind of catalyze those little moments, these little cascade effects, then that's really what's interesting. So I'd say before creating the art, take the time to think about where the levers of change are. Take the time to think about how it's going to be received and how people can participate in the art once they see it. And I think slowing down before creating the art is a way to make sure the art gets seen by more people, because it's a relationship, right? The art is a relationship between you and what you say and others and how it's received and what they can do about it. And if you can think about developing that relationship rather than just thinking about what you want to express and what you want to see change, then I think you can actually start creating more powerful art. So once again, that's like I guess it's still a more philosophical question than anything else, than a pure tactical one. But I think it's really because the technique of how to create art for change is not a formula. It's a journey, right? It's a series of questions that you need to continuously like ask and evoke and explore and experiment. And anything that is true today will not be true in 2 years, because the world is changing very, very fast.
Yeah, and what you have said today has, I think, really inspired us here at the WNPS, and it has got us thinking. And we would like to make a pledge, I would like to put it out there publicly, is that we do field trips, and we usually visit all these very beautiful locations. Yes, of course, we would love to host you when we can travel again. But we need to also maybe make some special photographic tours to places that are been affected by this deforestation and this environmental destruction that's really ongoing in Sri Lanka at the moment. Because that imagery could have a very powerful and hopefully lead to positive outcomes when it comes to policy. And so that's what I was thinking, and that's something we pledge on the part of the WNPS to do when we can travel again around the island.
Amazing.
Right now, I don't have any more questions coming up. So any final thoughts, Benjamin, because before we wrap up?
I guess maybe one final thought is to, I think in the conservation space, sometimes it's hard to stay positive. Like we look at the world and we're seeing the rate of destruction, and we say like where is the hope? Like what do we have to hope for the future? We have these big companies, we have these corrupt governments, we have all these different problems, and like what can I do as an individual? And I think that's somewhat true of like every generation. Like in the 80s, there was a whole environmental movement that, once that was pushing for recycling, and before that there might have been other issues. And I just think like I think that despite the challenges, despite the complexity, the hope lies in this next generation that's going to design systems. And I know there's this sort of like prevailing thought that like, why is it up to us as younger folks to fix the problems of the older generation? I think that's like a pretty prevalent dominating narrative. But even within like the biggest companies, like in Silicon Valley, there's this thing called the innovator's dilemma. And it's that the old legacy infrastructures cannot innovate their way out of the challenge that they've created for themselves. And that's why there's always room for new up and coming companies to destabilize the old established companies. And these are old established companies that have, you know, infinite resources and infinite talent and infinite thing, yet they're still scared of these small little startups that are coming up and testing out different things. And I think that same idea of how change happens within the corporate space is the same kind of change that can happen in the environmental space. It is these like small destabilizing initiatives that come up that actually prompt change to happen, and that these old legacy systems aren't going to find a way to actually create the exponential change that we need. Like at best, what we can hope for is institutions to get incrementally better at what they do. And so it's up to this new generation, whether it's through art, through story, through entrepreneurship, or anything like that, to come up with these uneven things, these like little transformations that can really change an entire system. It's like sort of like having a rock inside of a shoe. It's like a tiny little rock. It can cause a whole lot of grief. And so, you know, maybe we might feel like, oh, we're fighting up against giants, but we can still be that little thorn in the side that can shift the direction of these big titans by just being in the right place at the right time. And to not wait for someone else to change the world, but to be the one to actually like come up and just say like, this is actually what I want to see happen. And this is, I'm just going to try to do it. I'm going to make it happen. Right. And there's going to be better ways to do things that are going to continuously come up. There is going to be a better way to plant trees faster. There is going to be a better way to create regenerative systems, regenerative agriculture. There's so much potential in technology that is just waiting to be unleashed. And so look for these opportunities of hope. And, you know, anytime you feel down, you have to remember that you're not alone, because in this journey of being an activist, if you choose the path of being an activist, you're choosing a journey in which you're going to be spending most of your time losing. Like if you think of the civil rights movement, you know, people who were fighting for decades for equal rights were basically spent their entire careers losing, because the difference between winning and losing, like to get that policy passed or anything like that, that takes decades and decades of change and transformation. And it's okay to be losing for most of the time, but like what you're actually not seeing is the progress that is happening, the invisible progress, the momentum that's building. And even if you're losing, you're starting to lose with more and more people until you eventually transform that loss into a win. So you kind of, you know, I struggle with this, like staying positive and everything, but you have to like hold space for that, that positivity and that hope, because that's really what we have, I think, as a human species. Like every generation has trusted the next generation to come to fix the problems of the old generation. So yeah, I don't know if that's a good conclusion. Stay positive.
That's wonderful, because staying positive is key, especially with the state of the world currently. So seeing that light in, I think, innovation and innovative technology, as you very rightly said, is a driving force. We will be able to put hope. I like to be optimistic about these things as well. So yeah, stay positive,
the more,
as you say.
You know, when the worse the crisis, the more inspiring the stories, right? And
yeah,
was like Mr. Rogers say, you have to look for the helpers. So in every crisis, you're going to look for the helpers, and you'll find as much inspiration as you ever need to find.
And I'm sure we're going to have some very inspiring storytelling coming out of these past 2 years, past year and a half with COVID. So,
yes,
yeah.
absolutely.
So thank you once again, Benjamin,
right,
for gracing us with your wonderful presence. And
you.
also a big thank you to the Canadian High Commission for facilitating this and partnering up with the WNPS on this series. It's been absolutely wonderful. So the next session we will be again partnering up with the Canadian High Commission next week on Thursday, the 18th of March with OceanWise, well, in 2 weeks' time, on the 18th of March, with a Canadian organization called OceanWise delivering the WNPS public lecture. So stay tuned on our social media channels for more information about that. But thank you once again, and good night, and have a nice day for you, Benjamin. Because I know
Thank you.
morning for
Thank
you.
you everyone for listening. I hope I didn't put everyone to sleep. All right. Take care. Bye.